Hello guys, welcome back to the channel, and I want to thank everyone who is subscribed to this channel. Thank you so much. It means a lot to me because I started this as an idea to give each and everyone a voice to speak out, to engage, to have meaningful discussions about the future, because without us, the youth, the future is blurred and murky. So the biggest question that everyone is having is the Zimbabwean situation over? Or is this the end? Is this what we call another 5 years? So the president, the newly elected president, has given his wife a doctorate, and he has sworn in the MPs, and particularly he has shown us that there is no regard of moral statutes within his administration by recycling the vice president Kembo Mohadi, who is, in my opinion, unnecessary at this point in time. Okay, maybe let me explain why. If those who are from ZANU-PF, please, can you make me understand? Maybe I am failing to grasp or to have cognition of what's happening. Are you telling me that ZANU-PF is no energetic young presidential figure or vice presidential figure who can come and fill the shoes of the second VP from Matabeleland? In my last video, I talked about how ZANU acts like an abusive husband to a forgetful woman or wife. And this time, it really doesn't matter if the recount or the recollection of history is marred or is blurred or is murky. The most evident thing is that the poor governance in Zimbabwe is evident, and it's tremendous, and it can only lead to a very precarious situation in the country. The young people are suffering. Drugs are being abused. It's very important. But anyway, it's not the subject of the day. So today we need to talk about the House of Commons in the UK, which has tabled the issue of the recently done elections in Zimbabwe. And this is what they had to say.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name in the order paper.
My Lords, the United Kingdom commends the Zimbabwean voters for their peaceful participation in Zimbabwe's recent elections. However, the UK shares the view expressed in international election observation missions preliminary statements that the pre-election period and the election day fell short of regional and international standards. The UK is also concerned about the lack of transparency surrounding the compiling of results by the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission and the severe disruption of domestic observation.
Now, there are key points that we need to take note of, and thereafter we need to give ourselves the opportunity to make a decision. First, the House of Commons agrees that the elections were not free and fair. But because there's going to be someone who's going to rebut what I'm saying, I'm already telling you beforehand. You should be aware that this has nothing to do with sovereignty, but this process happens whenever a country wants to be readmitted or to be admitted in the Commonwealth. So they look at the preconditions of what we call the democratization of a society, then they can re-engage with you or readmit you in the Commonwealth. So this has nothing to do with your sovereignty as Zimbabweans. When the president ED went to beg for the readmission into the Commonwealth, this is what he was looking for: criticism and also scrutiny from the British government.
My Lords, it was very obvious to every independent observer that those elections were not free and fair. In the words of Nelson Chamisa himself, they were a blatant and gigantic fraud. But the hard-hitting SADC report questioned the credibility of the elections and the breaches of its own standards.
Wow. The SADC report is finally admired by the British government. Okay, guys, I don't want to be funny anyway, but before this year's election, the SADC was always in favor of ZANU-PF, and it has always been endorsing the elections. But this time around, the House of Commons has been interested in what the SADC has to say. I don't know. I smell some red. Anyway, let's listen.
And as the saddest thing is, as the election observers left, sadly, the familiar pattern of widespread arrests, abductions and torture of grassroots supporters of the opposition is taking place as we speak all over the country. Even lawyers being arrested last night in a hospital where they were representing tortured victims. The same kind of retribution that Mugabe did after in 2008. Does the noble lord agree?
Again, we do not need to ask or to inquire if Edie and Robert were just the same person, but this just happened to be two buddies who were just fighting, and then one was, well, powerless than the other until one succumbed. And you know what they say about the elephants and grass, whatever, you know, when the elephants fight and then there's grass, whatever that thing is. Let's listen.
That now is the time for full support by His Majesty's Government for SADC's efforts to resolve the crisis.
SADC's efforts to resolve the situation. Wow, that's new. SADC all of a sudden is now a problem solver, not the problem. Kind of tricky, right?
In particular for our newly arrived ambassador to re-evaluate all facets of our relationship with the Zimbabwean government that flouts its own laws and through acts of violence and torture, and to give some hope, even in the darkest days, to the preservation and courage of the Zimbabwean people.
My Lords, the noble lady refers to the arrival of our new ambassador who arrived today, and he brings both diplomatic and development experience, and I'm sure he'll do an exemplary role in our relations with Zimbabwe, the communities in Zimbabwe, and all parties in Zimbabwe as well. The noble lady mentioned about the abduction and torture of opposition CCC members, which we have raised directly. I can report that we're relieved that they have been found and are receiving treatment for their injuries. We also note the arrest and subsequent bail of two lawyers acting on behalf of the alleged victims on the 4th of September.
The government's present concerns, and indeed those of Baroness, Noel Baroness, are quite correct. But would he accept also that Zimbabwe is potentially a vast country of potentially great wealth, and that in the longer term we shall actually need its markets, its support in keeping the Russians and Chinese from dominating the whole of Africa?
In future, we'll need its markets to keep China and Russia away from dominating Africa. So when I hear such sentiments, it makes things really hard for me to understand the motives of this caucus. So after listening to this, do we have any comprehension on how Africa is always used as a battleground?
And its raw materials. Would he accept that despite the present difficulties, and remembering that once Zimbabwe was a member of the Commonwealth and could be once again in the future, but clearly not now, would he accept that these things should be kept in the back of our minds?
My Lords, I agree with my noble friend who speaks with great insight and experience on these matters, and particularly with respect to the Commonwealth. That provides a real alternative to countries around the world in terms of the membership and the unique nature of the Commonwealth as an institution. However, any country seeking to join must abide by standards, and of course ultimately that decision is for all members of the Commonwealth.
The Minister.
Lords, I have just returned from Zimbabwe. I was a member of the Commonwealth Observer Group, and I have to say that we did a very extensive report, the interim statement of which should be found for all members in the library. There were, I have to say, quite a lot of factors which did lead us to doubt the credibility of this election. There were numerous factors, many factors which would also have been raised in 2018. So I think I would like to ask the Minister if he would agree that the ideal would be for Zimbabwe to re-enter the Commonwealth, but it can only do so when it meets the standards of proper democracy, the rule of law and free elections.
On the noble lady's question, I believe I've already answered that in part in response to my noble friend, but I agree with her. I commend her efforts and those of all the observer missions in observing the election, and we do hope ultimately inclusive pluralist democracies emerge and Zimbabwe can find its way back into the Commonwealth.
My Lords, it's...
In light of the developments in Zimbabwe, the widespread violence and intimidation of voters in the rural areas, the abduction and torture of many opposition activists, the continued detention of members of parliament of the opposition, will the UK government be rather less equivocal and make absolutely clear that it does not regard these elections as free and fair, that the government of Zimbabwe has no legitimacy, and as long as it is the case, it will not be readmitted to the Commonwealth as far as Britain is concerned, and that we will work with SADC colleagues to try and find resolutions to the problem?
My Lords, I'm sure the Noble Lord, as an observer on Zimbabwe, and I commend his work in this respect, would have seen the two statements that we've issued since the elections, and I also agree with him about the importance of working with key regional partners, including SADC. SADC are deployed very much, and they are also making the same representations that we are, along with other key interested parties, to ensure that there is a pluralist approach when it comes to democracy, because democracy needs stability and security and inclusivity for it to be sustainable. That point has been made consistently to the Zimbabwean authorities.
My Lord.
To reiterate the point I've made before, that the ingredients of a thriving democracy are not limited to elections. Civil society's role is vital, and I welcomed his statement before the summer recess about the government's response about the legislation that's being introduced. But has his department acknowledged that, or made any representations about the new Labour Act which they're pushing through in Zimbabwe, which the Zimbabwean Congress of Trade Unions has warned it will allow the government to interfere in trade union administration? Will he...
It's time to make an analysis of how the Second Cold War is shaping the Zimbabwean politics. Anyway, in my view, I don't think it's time for us to think of who is a threat to the sovereignty of Zimbabwe. It's a time for us to think about how best the Zimbabwean people can be helped to rediscover themselves, because clearly they have lost their identity and being. Anyway, if you ask me, do I think it's time for Zimbabwe to have a new government? 100% true. It's time, because ZANU-PF has failed. Do I think Chamisa is the best option? I think 100% as well. I don't think he's much of a bad person. And anyway, he's the next popular person after who? He's actually the most popular person. Do I think we mustn't trust the UK in Zimbabwe? I think so, we mustn't trust, because if someone has put you on a leash before, we should always tread carefully. And anyway, they've put sanctions and a lot of people are dying because of them. We don't need to argue about it. It's a fact. And then, do I think Chamisa is a Western puppet? No. I think he's a calculative person, and he will never fall victim to the Western or Eastern agenda. In fact, I don't care who is a puppet or not. People need schools that have books and education, food in plates, farms that produce. I think that's what's important. People need a functional government which does not put blames on any government. You know, I think it's very important that leaders should not give us excuses to why they are failing to lead or they're failing to provide for their people. It's not excuse. The most important thing that leaders should do in a progressive and functional society is to give the little that is there and share it equally. If you are giving people based on proximity to political parties, that's not politics. Real politics is to treat everyone fairly, yellow, red, green, or blue. I don't know what you think about this. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and let us share this video to all those people who want to engage and have a meaningful discussions. Until next time, my name is Tavato Simon, signing out.